It really is a disappointing day. I think that the minority has been a disappointing player today, Mr. Speaker, on the part of the people. But we remain ready to work with the gentleman. I'm hopeful that tomorrow, perhaps next week, will be a better week. And I yield back.
I thank the gentleman for yielding back. Mr. Speaker, the Majority Leader continues to want to blame the Democrats for his inability and the Republicans' inability to give a majority vote to their own bill. Maybe the American people, he thinks, can be fooled. You're in charge of the House. You have 234 members. 62 of your members voted against your bill. That's why it failed. We didn't whine, very frankly, when we were in charge, when I was the Majority Leader, about we didn't pass the bill. We got 218 votes for our bills. And it was pretty tough. We got 0 from your side. You got 24 from our side to help you. Mr. Peterson stuck to his deal. Now, on the budget, you say, we've got different philosophies. Yes, we do. Mr. Gingrich gave a speech on this floor about different philosophies, 1997 or 98. And he was speaking to your side of the aisle, and he was talking about the Perfectionist Caucus. He made an agreement with President Clinton, which to some degree was responsible for having balanced budgets. But your side thought it was not a good deal. Not all of your side. In a bipartisan vote, frankly, we passed the deal that was the agreement, the compromise that was reached between Mr. Gingrich and Mr. Clinton. But a lot of your folks said, no, no, our way or the highway, and he gave a speech that he called the Perfectionist Caucus speech. That's what, in my view, I'm hearing on the budget. Yes, we have differences. The American people elected a Democratic president. They elected a Democratic Senate and a Republican House. The only way America's board of directors and president will work is if we come together and compromise. The place to compromise under regular order is in a conference with our ideas and their ideas meeting in conference. The most central document that we need to do every year is to do a budget. But you're not going to conference. Your side will not appoint conferees. Your side will not move to go to conference. Patty Murray wants to go to conference. Senator Reid wants to go to conference. Your side over in the Senate won't go to conference. In my view, largely because they know you don't want to go to conference and they don't want to make a deal. They don't want to compromise on what their position is. We will take no blame for the failure of the Farm Bill. None. 0. As much as you try to say it, you can't get away from the statistic 62, otherwise known as 25% of your party, voted against a bill, which is why we didn't bring it to the floor last year when it was also reported out on a bipartisan fashion. I know you're going to continue, and your side's going to continue to blame us that you couldn't get the votes on your side for your bill because you took a bipartisan bill. And that's what Mr. Lucas was saying. I thought he was very articulate. I thought he was compelling. In pleading with your side, join us. Join us. It doesn't go as far as I'd like. And on reform, you talk about reform, and that's a good thing to talk about, that like we're against reform. The Senate bill has reform in it, Mr. Leader. The Senate bill has reform in it. Now, it's not in terms of dollars cutting poor people as much as this bill does, but it cuts. It has reform in it. What Sutherland wants, what apparently your side wants, is your reform, not a compromise reform. Mr. Lucas brought to the floor $20 billion and couched it as reform and said on the floor, it may not be enough for some and it may be too much for others, but it is a compromise. He was right. But it was rejected by 25% of your party, rejected the chairman, and that's why this bill failed. Unless the gentleman wants to say something further, I'll yield back the balance of my time. I yield back the balance of my time.
Thank you. The gentleman yields back his time. For what reason? The gentleman from Virginia rise.
I ask unanimous consent, Mr. Speaker, that when the House adjourns today, it adjourn to meet at 11 a.m. on Monday, June 24, 2013.
Without objection, so ordered. Are there any requests for 1-minute speeches? For what reason does the gentleman from Pennsylvania rise?
Speaker requests unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute, revise and extend.
So ordered. The gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, politics trump good government today in the U.S. House of Representatives. Members of this body demonstrate a failure to lead by voting down the Farm Bill. The federal government currently operates a costly maze of duplicative and outdated agriculture spending programs. The Farm Bill crafted by the House reflected a fiscally responsible plan that would have ended the abuses of food stamps, ended wasteful agriculture spending programs, and achieved a level of efficiency for existing programs that should be replicated in all areas of government. The Farm Bill would have eliminated automatic enrollment in food stamps and prevented fraudulent benefit payments by requiring states to verify eligibility for the program. The Farm Bill would have ended the economically disruptive policies that have worked to further destabilize our dairy markets. The bill transitioned to a more free market approach that's better for farmers and taxpayers alike. In the absence of this comprehensive reform package, the overspending and taxpayer waste will now continue. And I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. For what reason does the gentleman from California rise?
Request unanimous consent to speak for 1 minute.
The gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Ladies and gentlemen, what we have here today is a failure to communicate. I'm truly disappointed in this House because the Farm Bill that we just voted on and that did not pass was not ready because it was not balanced and it did not follow the rules as it should have. $20 billion from the mouths of the poorest children and families in America, that's one of the reasons why I voted no on that bill. I also voted against the bill in part because we did not even debate an amendment that I also endorsed, which was the Denham-Schrader amendment. That would have been the appropriate thing to do, the proper order. We didn't take the proper order. I think it's very important for all of us to understand that what we witnessed here today wasn't a failure of government. It was a failure of some individuals to do the right thing and to even follow the rules that they say that they want to follow. And that's why we don't have a Farm Bill that passed. Hopefully we can get back on track, follow the rules, and pass a Farm Bill very soon. Thank you very much. I yield back my time.
Thank you. The gentleman's time has expired. For what reason does the gentleman from Pennsylvania rise?
Seek unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute and revise and extend my remarks.
The gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This week marks the 50th anniversary of National Small Business Week. Each year we devote 1 week to recognize the importance of small businesses and to honor their successes. While it is admirable to devote a week to small businesses, what we have to remember is that every week is Small Business Week, and that the family farm, which we discussed here on the floor today, was in fact the original small business. Small businesses are the backbone of our economy and the engines of job creation, and over half of Americans own or are employed by a small business. Mr. Speaker, there are 30 million small businesses in the United States, and they create 7 out of 10 new American jobs each and every year. Small businesses are the key to economic prosperity. The government does not create jobs. American small businesses create jobs. The government and its lawmakers should do everything in their power to cultivate an ideal environment for small businesses to grow and prosper by removing roadblocks to growth and building economic certainty. We need to keep the focus on the American worker and on small businesses. We need to remember that every week is Small Business Week. I yield back.
Time has expired. Are there further requests for 1 minute? For what reason does the gentleman from Texas rise?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I ask unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute.
The gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise reluctantly to express my disappointment in today's proceedings. I'm one of those Democrats who voted for a bipartisan product coming out of committee. But unfortunately today, the bill that we saw come out of committee became an extremely partisan product towards the end. I hope that as we continue, because one of the challenges for me was that I'm a firm believer in the SNAP program. It's an anti-hunger safety net that serves vulnerable children and seniors across our country. The average benefit is $4.50 a day. That's a lifeline. That's not a luxury. In 2010, SNAP helped more than 3.6 million people in Texas afford food. It's critical to children and seniors. In the 23rd Congressional District, there's 36,000 households in the district receiving SNAP. The vast majority are households with working-class families and working-class families with young kids. Today was a disappointment. I was perfectly prepared to work for a product that we could get to conference. I had my card to vote green. But it seemed, and watching the debate here, the finger pointing immediately, the blame, who did what to who, is just so frustrating. Because the truth is that we've got to get somewhere in the middle. And when you continually offer these amendments that move us further and further off of the middle, and move us further and further and further and further to the right, it makes it increasingly difficult to support what should be a bipartisan.
Gentleman's time has expired.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, for your time.
What reason does the gentlewoman from Texas rise? Gentlewoman is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Most of America would ask the question, what happened here today? And I can proudly say that what happened here today is the little hand of a hungry child raised it up and said, what about me? You can talk about farms and little ones and big ones, and I'm a big supporter of our agricultural production in this nation. It is from the soil. But I am very glad that we stood up for the children who were faced and confronted with $20 billion in cuts from something that stamps out hunger. Households with children receive about 75% of all food stamp benefits. But, Mr. Speaker, we didn't want to just stop there. We didn't want to just take food from 200,000 hungry children. We wanted to make sure that if you were a disabled parent with a young child, you don't have child care, you can't find a job, your SNAP money would not be given to you by the state, and they would be able to keep it. We didn't just want to take food out of a hungry child's mouth. We wanted to slap them down. We wanted to make sure that the state would be grinning by saying, ha, ha, ha. Not only do you not get food, but in the same breath, we get to keep the money. We're better than this as America. We can do better. This bill was defeated because the hand of a hungry child was able to be heard on the floor of this House. I'm glad that I stood with a hungry child and stamped out hunger in that child's heart, stomach, and mind. Today, a child's voice, sweet and quiet as it is, Mr. Speaker, was loud and clear. Don't take food from me. I yield back.
Thank you. Lady's time has expired. 1 minute. For what reason? Under the Speaker's announced policy of January 3rd, 2013, the gentlewoman from Texas, Ms. Jackson Lee, is recognized for 60 minutes as the designee of the Minority Leader.
I thank the Speaker. It's not often that you're able to come back to the podium as soon as I've been able to do so. I thank him for his courtesies. And I come with a number of concerns. I started this week, in the middle of the week, to speak about unfinished business. But first I want to celebrate and acknowledge a day this week that many of us commemorate. In fact, it is moving to become a national recognition, and it's something, it is called Juneteenth. Today is June 20th, so yesterday, June 19th, was Juneteenth. And I didn't get a chance to explain what Juneteenth meant on the floor of the House, and I wanted to do so. For in 1865, the captain of a Union army, arose and arrived on the shores of Galveston, Texas, to let the then slaves who had not been noticed, who had not been freed in 1863 when, on January 1st, when President Lincoln signed the Emancipation Proclamation, finally the Union came to our shores in Texas and let a whole swath of slaves who were still working and toiling, unpaid, in conditions that were obviously unsatisfactory because no one should hold slaves. Finally, in 1865, on June 19th, those in Texas and places to the west were freed. So it is a day of freedom, and when I talk to children about Juneteenth, I said it is living freedom. It is accepting the values of this great nation that turned, I hope forever, against the idea of holding others as slaves. And it moved this nation forward even in difficulty of women not being able to vote and African Americans moving from Reconstruction into Jim Crowism in the terrible times of the 1900s, and as well moving into the time of second-class citizenship all the way through World War II as President Truman integrated the United States military. But it moved the country to a lust and a desire for freedom and opportunity. So Juneteenth is a day of jubilation. It's a day when families gather together, but it is a very important historic time. And it is a historic time, if you will, to be able to, in fact, acknowledge what has been wrong can be fixed. For it wasn't a pleasant time to, in essence, work as a slave, be held as a slave, be captured as a slave, some 18 months almost to now almost 2 years after the Emancipation Proclamation. I say that because I wanted to explain further why something that had traditionally been bipartisan, we love the farm life, for those who experienced it, those who read about it. And often in my tenure here in the United States Congress, urban members and rural members came together to pass a bill that generated not only food for America, but food for the world. Let it be very clear that we took pride today to vote no, because sometimes you have to listen and understand that there are things greater than your own selfish interests. I don't know what reason caused the implementation or the addition of a $20 billion cut to the SNAP program. Who had to be satisfied to put that gigantic, unsympathetic, cruel cutting of food from the plates of Americans? SNAP has no region, it has no racial identity, it has no age identity. It is frankly Americans who are in need. Let me share with you some numbers. Households with children receive about 75% of all food stamp benefits. That immediately quashes the stereotype that deadbeats get food stamps. 23% of households include a disabled person. 18% of households include an elderly person. The food stamp program increases household spending. The increase is greater than that would occur with an equal benefit in cash. These people are not asking for cash. They are asking for you to allow them to be able to buy decent food so there is nutrition and nourishment. But again, what motivated a $20 billion cut that had never been implemented in an agricultural bill that many of us voted on in a bipartisan manner? Did anybody listen to the chairman of the Federal Reserve?
The chair will receive a message.
Mr. Speaker, a message from the President of the United States.
Mr. Speaker,
Mr. Secretary.
I'm directed by the President of the United States to deliver to the House of Representatives a message in writing.
The gentlelady from Texas may proceed.
I thank you. We pause for a message from the President, and that is the protocol of this House. But the Chairman of the Federal Reserve just said yesterday that the economy is percolating, that it's doing all that it needs to do, that they're not going to reduce interest rates yet, but they're monitoring it because jobs are being created, not enough. But the economy is finding ways to restore itself. It was good news for some of our college students finding more jobs than they found last year as a college graduate. And so the idea that we need to continue to punish the American people, to wound ourselves, because there's something out there called the deficit, this imaginary continue to undermine the government standard bearer that everyone wants to use. There is a deficit, but it has been steadily coming down because of the belt tightening. But now we want to go beyond the belt tightening. We want to go beyond the family of four that says, you know what, we're not going to go out as much. We're going to have some more cereal than we've used to have. No, we're going to tell the family of four, you're not going to have any cereal. Just wake up in the morning and drink water. We're going to take everything away, and maybe you'll have one meal a day. This is absurd, and it is not the American way. Every $5 in new food stamp benefits generates almost twice as much, $9.20 in total community spending. The economics of SNAP food supports programs that benefit everyone by preventing new food deserts from developing. The impact of SNAP funds coming into local and neighborhood grocery stores is more profitable areas of grocery stores and supermarkets, more jobs for people. SNAP funds going into local food economies also make the cost of food for everyone less expensive. It is clear that the SNAP program is a valuable program. In fact, SNAP is the largest domestic program in the American Domestic Hunger Safety Net. The food and nutrition service programs supported by SNAP work with state agencies, nutrition educators, and neighborhoods, as well as faith-based organizations to assist those eligible for nutrition assistance. Food and nutrition service programs also work with state partners in the retail community to improve program administration and work to ensure the program's integrity. But let me tell you, beyond the $20 billion, let me provide you with what else occurred. Not only did the $20 billion be in the underlying bill, but that wasn't enough. They offered an amendment on the floor to take another $3.31 billion, this looks, it might be $31 billion, to make it an estimate $31 billion in cuts. If that isn't outrageous, I don't know what is. Literally, not only are they taking the food, but they're taking the table, the utensils, and leaving you with a good-looking floor, if that's what you have, or a rough floor, to simply go there and admire food. This is an outrageous addition. Cutting off benefits of 2 million Americans extra who struggle to find work, severing the tie between LIHEAP and SNAP, which is the dollars that supplement those who are not able to pay their energy bill in the cold of the winter. How could you? Penalizing those who don't abide by an unnecessary burdensome job search if you have a disabled child. This is what was on the floor. Not just taking food away, but literally dismantling the table. Oh, that wasn't enough. Then they wanted to do this. This looks like a great idea. As you well know, varying states have different economic positions. Some states are thriving because of the industry that they have. A state like Texas has an energy-based, oil-based economy. Some states have other kinds of economies, and those economies are coming back. But there's still poor people and people without jobs. And this is what the SNAP program is for. It is not for fraud, waste, and abuse. I don't have any problem with oversight. But how dare you take food away from children, cutting out school lunches, cutting out school breakfasts that sometimes are the difference between a child learning and surviving. But that wasn't enough. Listen to another amendment that was offered and passed on the floor of the House. It makes the SNAP policies, this amendment, even worse than what I've just discussed. It would allow states to put in their pocket, smack their lips, roll their hands, the savings if they cut people off of the supplemental nutrition program. That means disabled, parents with young children who don't have child care, those who are unable to find work in the area that they're in because there are no jobs available in that community, and there are census data and census tracts where you can't find jobs. This amendment would provide no funding for job search or job creation to help recipients of the SNAP program find work, and it places no restrictions on what states can use the bonus monies that they put in their pocket for. Oh, they can throw it for all kinds of unnecessary extras, if you will. Maybe they can do extra security for roaming elected officials. And when I say that, our state is quarreling over whether it should have paid security costs for our governor. Or maybe it could throw a few extra parties. Maybe it could build another bridge to nowhere. I'd be happy to yield, and just as I finish this sentence, what would they do with putting this money out of the mouth of babes in their pocket? I'd be happy to yield to the gentleman.
I thank the gentlelady for yielding, and because it is with a full heart that I come to the well of the House and address the members to say that the gentlelady from Texas and I didn't see eye to eye on every part of this bill, though we are in the same party. And those of us who are new to this Congress, who came here because we heard that the American people wanted us to work together and solve problems, those of us on the Agriculture Committee approached this bill with an open mind and with a willingness to compromise. And we did so. We worked together to include in this bill the best combination of things we thought would help the American people, and in my case, the people of the Hudson Valley. And that meant we also tolerated things that we disagreed with very strongly, Mr. Speaker. But we moved the process forward because we believed that if we brought it to the floor of the House, and if the House passed it and we sent it to conference with the Senate, that we would be able to accept the compromise in good faith that this body worked out. But what happened today on the floor of the House of Representatives was that the extremism of a small number of people has set back progress for the rest of us. Once again, the insistence on something so extreme has defeated good faith efforts like those of my colleagues, particularly the new members of Congress on the Agriculture Committee, who wanted to reach an honorable compromise to make progress for our farmers, to help our dairy farmers in particular, to help our conservation efforts, to help our beginning farmers, to help folks with flood mitigation, particularly in the Black Dirt region of Orange County that I represent in New York. We thought we could work together. And what we saw today, what we learned today, was that extremism is still alive and well in the floor of this House, and that there are those who would rather destroy the fragile efforts at bipartisan cooperation than work together on something that we can all move forward together with that will help the American people and help our farmers. The Sutherland Amendment, which the gentlelady has properly described, is so punitive, so mean-spirited, that would deny basic food assistance to women with small children, to people with disabilities. It would require work where there is no work. It is not designed to be a reform. It is designed to kill this bill. And it succeeded in that purpose today by destroying the good faith efforts of those of us who worked together. Once again, Tea Party extremism has destroyed the efforts of people of good faith to make progress and get results. It is a sad day in the House of Representatives, and it's a tough education for those of us who've come here ready to work together across the aisle and who have proven that with our votes in a bipartisan fashion to move this bill forward, despite the presence of things we didn't like. And I call on my colleagues on both sides of the aisle to bring this bill back to the floor because it matters. It matters for our farmers. It matters for our communities in the Hudson Valley. And we can work together to improve it. But we must stop these destructive efforts to stop all progress. And I thank the gentlelady, and I yield back.
I applaud the gentleman for his honesty and for his work, because as I began this debate, we have always voted in a bipartisan manner on the Farm Bill. For those of us in the urban areas that have touched a little of the rural or live in states that have large pockets of rural areas, we are well aware that we are the breadbasket of the world. And when we travel the world, we're always eager to see the food products. That has been our nomenclature. That's been our name. That's been what America's known for, not only its generosity and its heart, but its willing to feed the hungry. And as I indicated, who could craft an amendment that would deep six this bill, adding insult to the $20 billion that I know the gentleman indicated we were looking to compromise in the conference. But to say to the gentleman, we all would hope the bill will come back, and maybe it might even come back with the recognition that the $20 billion is spiking too high. But certainly the Sutherland Amendment and the one previously that did not pass, that wanted to cut even more from the $20 billion, is too, if I might say, it's an oxymoron between the farm and those who need to eat. We always work together, that we were able to produce products and enough food to give those who are hungry and those who could not find work. And I want to make mention of the fact, as the gentleman said, that included in taking their checks away from them, or their food, not their checks, were the disabled, the parents with young children. So I want to thank the gentleman for his words and, of course, for his leadership for his area, but also on this topic. So that is two members from two distinct places, Democrats, who would have been able to come and find a reasoned way to address this bill. Might I also say that I do thank the committee for acknowledging an amendment to be able to reach out, my amendment, the Jackson Lee amendment that was included, but I'm willing to sacrifice that amendment that was to reach out and create opportunities for minority businesses, women-owned businesses, family farmers, black farmers who have been discriminated against for eons under the Agricultural Department. My amendment would have caused a Pacific outreach to these individuals, and I'm glad for it. Was able to support the McGovern Amendment, which had an offset that I believe was a proper offset that would have put the money, $20 billion, back in. Again, I want to remind my colleagues, our deficit is going down, our economy is percolating. I didn't say it was perfect. I didn't say everyone had a job. But what I did say is that making progress. Why are we continuing to do injury to those who cannot speak for themselves? I do not know. And again, I was eager to see in this bill to be able to work with more urban gardens, community gardens, what we call victory gardens. They've been successful in the city of Houston, in Acres Home, in fact, in Fifth Ward. I see them as progress, the growing of food, the putting food on the tables, healthy food, of people who don't have the means to get good vegetables, and to be able to use those urban gardens to teach children, to help families come together, and to be able to take home good food. I want to pay tribute to the Houston Food Bank in my congressional district that has brought so many people together. But I can tell you that they're not lacking in business. And the $20 billion of this SNAP program going down, meaning being taken away, one of the largest food banks in America, would have been impacted negatively by the idea of the lack of the supplemental nutrition program. I wanted to also make sure that we had an assessment of helping the older Americans have accessible and affordable nutrition one of my amendments that did not get in. But when we see older Americans, we can tell sometimes that they're making choices between food and obviously their medicine, their prescriptions. I wanted to make sure that we had a special commitment to helping them build up their access to nutritious food along with those who suffer with disabilities. I wish that had gotten in. And then I wanted to make sure that we did not turn our backs on obesity and juvenile obesity. Just this week, the medical community has joined and named obesity as a disease. And my amendment would have had a sense of Congress that encourages food items being provided pursuant to the federal school breakfast and school lunch program, and that the kind of nutritious items should be selected, and so we can bring down the incidence of juvenile obesity and maximize nutritional value and take away the possibility of our children not having the right kind of nutrition. So I am eager to get back to the drawing board, but I walk through neighborhoods that suffer from the lack of access to food. And as well, I'm aware of something called food deserts, where the only place that you can buy is the local gasoline gas station location. And maybe you can find an apple or banana, but mostly what you're going to find is a lot of, if you will, the other kind of food. Some have called it junk food. Pretty tasty. Make sure there's a market for it. It's always good to have fun, but it's not what you have to raise children, to provide for those who are ill, disabled, parents who cannot work. That's not where they should be shopping. Food deserts exist in rural and urban areas and are spreading as a result. Fewer farms as well as fewer places to access fresh fruits, vegetables, proteins, and other foods. And that's why this bill is important, to help our small farmers, but also to help those get assistance. And by the way, the supplemental nutrition program is not welfare because there are many people who are working who are on food stamps, but their income is such that they cannot provide for the nutritious food for their children. But the main insult is the loss of these dollars for our breakfast and lunch program, that no matter whether you're living in rural America or urban America, your child has the ability to have a good, warm, hot meal for lunch and for breakfast to get them started and ready to learn. And therefore, it avoids the metabolic function that comes from malnutrition that causes the breakdown in tissue. For example, the lack of protein in a diet leads to disease and decay of teeth and bones. Another example of health disparities in food deserts are the presence of fast food establishments. Again, it's good to have fun, but if that is all that you eat, then you know that that is not going to make for a healthy young person, child, in the growing years, the maturing years, the years that their cognitive skills are going, the years that they're strengthening their physical being in order to grow into an adult that will be healthy. And so many of us took the SNAP challenge, the Supplemental Nutrition Challenge, to live on $4.50. And I went to the grocery store, and I was so scared about going over. I bought 1 apple, 1 banana, 2 apricots. I bought an avocado and a tomato and 2 potatoes. And I was calculating in my mind because this was $4.50 for the day. And I went to the meat area and looked at, of all things, chopped meat, hamburger meat. I couldn't find anything that would even fit. They were all $5, $4. I kept looking. Cheese, too expensive. And I found something in a package called smoked chicken. And in this store, they had it for 58 cents, processed smoked chicken. And I said, that I can use for protein. And so the meal in my mind was going to be an apricot and a banana for breakfast. Lunch, you boil a potato with sliced tomatoes, which you would save for your big meal, your dinner. But every day, a family has to look at $4.50 to have their meals. And so for anyone that thinks that this is a bunch of folk who enjoy getting these food stamps to have a jolly good time, I'm glad that I experienced that purchase and what you get for $4.50. And yet on the floor of the House today, there were those who are willing to put up a bill that would take $20 billion and literally, as I started to say and have said, dismantle the kitchen, dismantle the table, take the utensils, and just say plop down on the floor. And as we came to the end of the bill, that was not enough. The Sutherland Amendment came forward and said, not only are we going to insult you and take all the utensils and table away, but we're going to make it a boondoggle. We're going to give incentives. We're going to make it a gambling opportunity for our states. We're going to let them throw the dice. How many can you get off of SNAP? And if you get them off, you'll be able to pocket the money. We don't want to control what you do with it. We're not going to suggest that you put it in education or maybe give back to the schools so they can get a different kind of meal for the child that's lost the breakfast program. No, we don't care. You're just going to pocket the money and run off into the hills. States have many burdens. I'm a champion of our states. I love my state. But I've seen the tough debates that my state legislators have had fighting to get a few parcels for food, for education dollars, for infrastructure dollars. So I know it's tough. But as I said, some states are a little bit more better off than others. It's all about priorities. And I can only say, Mr. Speaker, that today we didn't commend ourselves well. I want to go back. I want to be able to, if you will, I want to be able to put the table, the utensils back, the tablecloth. I want to be able to have a poor family have a nutritious meal. I want to be able to have a child to have a lunch or a breakfast. I want a disabled person to be able to have the right kind of food to help them in their illness. I want an elderly person to be able to have their prescription drugs and as well to be able to have food that will nourish them. I close, Mr. Speaker, by saying that I spoke about unfinished business. And as we go forward, I join my colleague from New York, call upon the good people of this House who represent the good Americans of this nation to come back together and find a way that passes a farm bill that does not put on the sacrificial table of destruction poor people who, through no fault of their own, are unemployed or disabled or have children or are only able to support the children and provide for them in this way because they live in an area where there are no jobs. They hope there'll be jobs. They want there to be jobs, but at this point, it hasn't come. I conclude my remarks by saying, in a list of things that we must do as unfinished business, I look forward as well to us being able to join some mothers that stood with me earlier this week, mothers that demand action, and they asked me about the idea of protecting their children with sensible gun legislation that will prevent gun violence. I hope, among other initiatives, the universal background check, that we'll also look to laws that will require the storage of one's guns, none of which that impact or takes away from the Second Amendment. And then I hope in unfinished business that we will continue to find, in a bipartisan way, a pathway forward for helping those individuals who came to this country through no fault of their own, who've come to this country, who are working and don't want to do us harm, but simply want to find a way to stay in a country that they love, and as well to say to the American people that we take no shortness in your need and commitment for border security. I don't see why we can't do it all. That is not unheard of. It's not impossible. It frankly is something that we can do. I want to close by saying that I am a person that loves the Constitution, believes in the Bill of Rights, the First Amendment, the freedom of press, speech, Fourth Amendment that protects you against unreasonable search and seizure, the Griswold Supreme Court case along with the Ninth Amendment on the question of privacy. And so I'm going to make a commitment to my colleagues that we work together on the issue of ensuring the American people's civil liberties while we ensure our national security. We can do both. And I've introduced legislation that would ask for a study of all of the outside contractors that are in the intelligence business and to present that study to the United States Congress and ensure that all those who have top secret clearance are doing it in the name of this nation. Otherwise, to present a plan to reduce that usage by 25% by 2014. That is only the fair way, because certainly we must have oversight to who has access to your private information, and is it access in order to secure this nation. I stand with them if that is the case, but I ask the question, why are persons far-flung and unsupervised with top secret credentials, such as the individual who has decided to leak a number of information that is now being assessed? We have to ask the question, his credentials, do they meet the test? Are private contractors making a review of these individuals and assessing them and giving them clearance, or if not, not supervising them? I have to ask that question. And then I would say that it is important that where you can be presented opinions that deal with something we call the FISA court, where we deal with something that we call the FISA court, which is the court that we go into to protect your rights and to be able to go into and make determinations about whether or not there is surveillance. I would say to you that opinions that will not impact on national security or classified information can be shown to the American people. There's nothing wrong with that. And so I am looking forward to working in a bipartisan way on unfinished business. And I can only say, Mr. Speaker, in my final entreat to this body, the one thing that we should not do is to take the little hand of a child and to push it back from the table or from food. And what we did today was just that. I want a farm bill, but today I was proud to stand with the children of America who are better off because they've been able to stamp out hunger through a program called SNAP, the Supplemental Nutrition Program, and will continue to do so until we get it right. Our children are our precious resource. That, Mr. Speaker, I yield back my time.
The gentlewoman yields back. Under the Speaker's announced policy of January 3rd, 2013, the gentleman from Iowa, Mr. King, is recognized for 60 minutes as the designee of the Majority Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I appreciate the privilege of being recognized to address you here on the floor of the United States House of Representatives. And I won't at this time take up all the issues that were raised in the previous 45 minutes or so, Mr. Speaker. Instead, I'd like to talk about two topics, though. And one of those topics is the topic of the Farm Bill, which historically, in a sad way, failed here on the floor of the House of Representatives within the last hour or so, hour and a half. And the first thing I want to say about that is that the chairman of the Ag Committee, Frank Lucas of Oklahoma, has conducted himself in a fashion that is deserving and receives my admiration and should that of his constituents and the people in this country. One of the most difficult balances to achieve in any bill that we produce here in Congress is that 5-year, we call it the Farm Bill, the 5-year Farm Bill that has roughly 80% nutrition in it, about 20% agriculture in it. In each 5 years, we try to write the best formula and look into the crystal ball for the next 5 years as well as we can. And it takes a chairman of the Ag Committee, which is the least partisan of the committees here on the Hill, to direct the committee staff, which are very experienced and some of the best staff people we have here on the Hill, to work with the Ag staff of the Democrat side, or the opposite party, and work with the ranking member to try to bring together such a variety of issues that have to do with sugar and dairy and crop insurance and nutrition and the qualifications for nutrition, piece after piece of this. It's like a huge accordion, and the chairman of that committee has got to make decisions on each component of that huge accordion to try to get it lined up in a way that if you go a little too far into the necessary reduction in the food stamp side, you lose votes over here on the Democrat side. If you don't take enough out of there, you lose votes on the Republican side. If you don't take enough money out of agriculture, you lose it over here on some of the conservative side. And on the other hand, if you don't have enough subsidy, you lose votes on the Democrat side. This is a very difficult balance, Mr. Speaker. And the marriage between the Farm Bill and the nutrition component of this, or the agriculture component and the nutrition component that we erroneously call the Farm Bill here because of history, that marriage was created out of necessity because the farm program could not be passed on its own. There were too many opponents to that, and the nutrition program had too much opposition on its own. And they married the two together, and each 5 years or so, and it hasn't always happened in 5 years. I don't know when it's ever actually happened perfectly. It's been dialed together as closely as possible and asked for cooperation from Democrats and Republicans to finally come together and pass a bill. Frank Lucas put that together as perfectly as I think it could be done. I think, Mr. Chairman, that he was a maestro in the way he orchestrated all of this. And I watched as we went through the committee markup. We did one last year and couldn't get floor time to debate a bill. And so the work of the committee wasn't necessarily wasted because we started again this year. And we began to put the pieces together again. And we had a long markup of the bill, an extended markup of the bill, not as long as it was the previous year. And the pieces came together, and here's what it needed. It needed to have a strong bipartisan support coming out of committee before it was going to get floor time. And it needed to have a prospect, a reasonable prospect of 218 votes here on the floor of the House before that floor time would be granted. And as we've seen from the Speaker, he has consistently said that he wants to see the House work its will. Now, he let that happen on a continuing resolution in January, or I'll say February of 2011, and we did 92 hours of debate here on the floor under an open rule on every aspect of the budget. That was the House working its will, and that was the longest and the most expressive way that I have seen this House work its will. But the Rules Committee here on the Farm Bill that came out of the Ag Committee allowed a whole series of amendments here on the floor. The chairman spoke to that number. I think he said over 100 amendments here on the floor. And yes, there was an agreement made under unanimous consent to pass a group of them that were not contentious en bloc, as we say. I think there was a real sincere effort to work a bill out here on the floor that would come to a conclusion that received 218 votes. And today, Mr. Speaker, we saw an example of when that didn't work. When an amendment or two or three went on that were more of an objection to that careful and delicate balance that had been put together by Frank Lucas. And in the end, when the votes could not come together, in a very rare thing, a 5-year bill that actually has been 6 years since we've passed one, failed here on the floor of the House of Representatives. Mr. Speaker, I won't forget this day. And I hope that this Congress, and I hope the American people, and I hope especially the constituents of Frank Lucas remember the job that he has done. I don't ever remember seeing anybody in this Congress work so wisely, so honestly, so justly, so carefully to put together something that had to be so carefully balanced. To have a glass of cold water thrown in his face is what happened here, I think, on the floor today. So I wanted to express my regret that the Farm Bill failed here today, and my appreciation for Frank Lucas, for the subcommittee chairs and the ranking members that worked with us on this, those that gave their word and kept it. I thank all of them. And Mr. Speaker, I'm hopeful that the day will come that that work that has been earned is exonerated by a vote here on the floor of the House. In either case, I want the record to reflect my opinion and my appreciation for Frank Lucas. We've had a big week here, Mr. Speaker. And in this big week and this big day that I'll just call yesterday, I look back on it after a full day and I wondered, one, how would one actually do all the things that were accomplished yesterday? I just want to run through that narrative because it's fresh in my mind. And that is that yesterday we did the longest press conference in the history of Congress. I don't know what competition there might have been for that. Now, who would want to have a long press conference? Well, somebody that wanted to have a long time to air out a huge issue. And the issue was immigration. And I have believed for some weeks now, in fact 2 or 3 months, that the machinery of this Congress was set up to push immigration, and I'll call it comprehensive immigration reform, close quote, which is, of course, the euphemism for amnesty, through this Congress faster than the Congress could adjust to it, learn about the policy within the issues, and faster than the American people could learn about it and weigh in. We always need to move at the pace of the American people so that they have a chance to let us know what they think, and we have a chance to digest that policy and make those decisions. This immigration issue was moving too fast. I believed, and I believe, that it was accelerated too quickly in the United States Senate. I believe that today. It's moving too quickly without enough debate. It's too big a decision to be made. I believed, and I believe, that it's still moving too quickly through the House of Representatives. And I would point out that there was a gang of 8 in the Senate. There remains a gang of 8 in the Senate that had been meeting in private and holding some press conferences talking about the things that they were attempting to do, that finally rolled out a bill. I believe it was rolled out at 844 pages long. And the debate and the markup that took place in the Judiciary Committee in the United States Senate was relatively long. There were a good number of amendments that were offered, but most of those votes, some might even say all of those votes, just came down the lines of whether they were part of the deal or whether they weren't part of the deal. So it looked like the Gang of 8 had a deal going into the Judiciary Committee markup. They certainly came out of that with their deal intact, and it's to the floor of the United States Senate today. That's fast and fast track. And while that's going on, the attention of the American people on this issue has been split between the United States Senate and the House. There's been a working group, a bipartisan working group in the House also. In the Senate, it's 4 Democrats and 4 Republicans on the Gang of 8 in the House. I learned not that long ago that the working group was 4 Democrats and 4 Republicans. I also learned that the Speaker encouraged their work, and I learned that they were working in secret for perhaps the last 4 years. Well, it was in secret. I have, I believe, served more time in the seat, listening, hearing immigration information and reading through reports, probably than anybody else on my side of the aisle over the last decade, although there are 2 or 3 that I think have a high level of expertise on immigration policy. My antennae aren't that weak here, Mr. Speaker, that I'm not picking up the signals of what's going on behind closed doors. We talk, we flow through here to vote, we meet with each other. But I didn't know that there was a secret committee working here out of the House of Representatives that had the blessing of the Speaker. I didn't know that until it was announced by the press some weeks ago. And the secret committee that didn't admit to its existence, some of them facetiously spoke about it as that secret committee, even though they finally admitted, and the press, I think, ferreted this out, that they were on that committee. This committee of 4 Republicans and 4 Democrats in the House of Representatives that was secret. Now it's not a committee of 8 any longer. It's a committee of 8 minus 1, at least as far as I know. Their ability to produce a bill seems to have been stalled here in this Congress. I'm not sorry about that. About the same time that conclusion may have been drawn, I heard our Speaker, I believe it was 2 weeks ago on Friday at his press conference, say he hoped to see immigration legislation pass out of the Judiciary Committee in the month of June. Well, that was a surprise to me, and when the announcement came shortly thereafter that we should clear our schedules for this week and next week as members of the Judiciary Committee to prepare for markup on immigration, I saw that as a green flag that was dropped. That moves the immigration policy more quickly here in the House of Representatives than I'm comfortable with. But I do not criticize the conduct of our chairman of the Judiciary Committee. Bob Goodlatte is one of the more astute people on policy that we have in this Congress. He is a seasoned and knowledgeable and smart legislator, and he sees the pieces that are moving and understands what he needs to do to move the right pieces. And I have served with him on 2 committees now for more than 10 years. And yet, the pace that's going through this Congress may be a wise one. It may be a wise one if enforcement first is what emerges here from the House of Representatives, and if the bill in the Senate can be slowed down or stopped in the Senate. The consensus that I hear among the Republican conference in the House of Representatives is this, Mr. Speaker: stop the bleeding at the border. Shut off the bleeding at the border. Close the border. Get that done. And when you get that done, then come back and talk about the other things. I'd make the point that when I came here a little more than 10 years ago, I said then, let's stop the bleeding at the border. We've got to close the border. I came to this floor, and when people said, well, we can't, I've advocated long that we should build a fence, a wall, and a fence on our southern border. And that fence, wall, and fence that we can build on the border would be what would be help to secure our border. I agree that we would add to that sensory devices, vibration sensors, motion detectors, you name it, add all of that to it. But you simply cannot have enough Border Patrol agents to control 2,000 miles of border with the conditions that we have. They have to rotate shifts, they get their vacations, there's time off. It takes a lot of people on payroll to have enough people on the ground, and we know that there's bleeding through that border, a lot that's crossing through the border. Mr. Speaker, I went down and did a surprise visit to a port of entry at Sassabee, Arizona. And when I walked in there, because they didn't know a member of Congress was about ready was showing up there, I spoke with the shift supervisor, and his name was Mike Kring. And he since passed away, sadly, and I think that he was a strong enforcement officer. He was well respected by his men that I saw around him. But I asked him about the frequency of the crossing there at the legal crossing at the port of entry, which is pretty much a rural port of entry in Sassabee, Arizona. And he said, well, this crossing isn't the busiest crossing near here. There's an illegal crossing east of me that's far busier and a legal crossing west of me that's far busier. This is just our formal crossing. And that tells you something about what's going on the border. We can close the border. We can do it with the resources that we have. I've long said that. I've not changed my position. I think it's stronger rather than weaker. And I may be the only one that's actually gone back and done the work to calculate what we're spending to defend our southern border. And these numbers are old, Mr. Speaker, that I'm about to quote here this afternoon. They come to this, that when you add up, there's a 50-mile area north of our southwest border. Within that 50 miles, you will see Border Patrol agents, Custom Border Protection agents. You'll see ICE agents in there also. And the effort that's done to control our border also, it's the cost of their vehicles, their communications, the benefits package, all of the things that we invest in that area. When you add that all up, and you divide it out by the 2,000 miles, which is pretty close to it's the best number to use for the length of the border in the southern border, you end up with this number. And this number would be adjusted upward, not downward, to get it more current than the roughly 3 years ago that I'm talking about. $6 million a mile. We're spending $6 million a mile at a minimum every year to control our southern border. And we're getting, according to Border Patrol testimony before the Immigration Subcommittee, about 25% enforcement. They think that of the 100 people that would try to cross the border, they might be stopping about 25%. Now, it's probably gotten a little better in the last couple of years, but when I go down to the border, Mr. Speaker, and I ask the agents there candidly, without identifying themselves and without going on public record, what percentage of the illegal border crossers are we interdicting? The most consistent number I get is 10%, not 25. Some will smirk and say, or not really smirk, but they'll just kind of snort and say, well, 3 or 4%. The real answer is, we don't know. They know more than we do. The 10% number seems to me to be more likely to be an accurate number than the 25% number, but think of this. At the peak of the illegal border crossings, we would have about 11,000 a night. That comes from 4 million illegal crossing attempts a year. 11,000 a night. Twice the size of Santa Anna's army coming across our border every night on average. And maybe those illegal crossings have been reduced by half. Maybe. That's still the size of Santa Anna's army every night. And we're talking about whether we should legalize the people that came across that border, and we're assuming by the argument of, say, Mr. Gutierrez of Illinois and many others that they're all innocent people that were brought in by their parents, maybe against their will, certainly without their knowledge that there was anything wrong with it or illegal with it, that's the universe of all the people that are unlawfully present in the United States are just simply those that wanted to come to America for a better life. Mr. Speaker, I go down to the border. I sit alongside that fence at night. I don't have night vision, but I have ears, and I can sit in the dark, and I can hear the vehicles come down through the mesquite. In fact, when you hear the one with the bad muffler come back a second time and a third time, you know they're shuttling people to come across the border at night. And within the last, say, an hour after dark to the next 2, 3, 4 hours after dark is when the highest traffic is, because they know they've got to walk across the desert a long ways, and they want to make as much time as they can before it turns daylight, where they might hole up or where they might be picked up if they can get to the highway north of there. And so I listen, and I hear the vehicles come through across the desert. I hear the mesquite scratch along the side of the vehicle, and you hear the doors open. Maybe 70, 80, 90, 100 yards south of the border, you can hear the doors open. You can hear people get out. First they open the door. You can hear them drop their pack on the ground. And then they get out. And then they close the door, kind of quietly, but it's still it's a quiet slam of the door. And you can hear them pick up their packs, whisper, and you hear them walk through the brush, and you can hear them cross the fence. And you know, when you're down there at night without night vision, you sometimes think you see some things you don't see. If you ever sat around at night in the pitch black dark and watched, your mind will play tricks on you. I can't say into the record, Mr. Speaker, that I saw good numbers of people walk across the border. I know I heard them. It's the only place they could have been going. I heard them go through the fence. I believe I saw the shadows, but I'm not certain of that particular component. I'm very confident that there are hundreds and hundreds of people that pour across that border at night, and that number that I said is roughly half of 11,000. The size of Santa Anna's army, which is 5,000 to 6,000, is roughly the number that we will see every night. Now, this border is wide open from that perspective, and all of the people that came into America aren't those that are coming through that path, and all of those people that are coming into America across that border, sometimes you'll see a pack train of 75, and every one of them will have a pack of marijuana on their back, and they're carrying it into the United States, smuggling it into the United States. Those people fit under the DREAM Act definition, too, if they came into the United States before they were 16, and if they'd been here whatever the length of time might be. If they came here before December 31st, 2011 would be the Senate version of the bill. I've been on the border, Mr. Speaker, and seen the shadow wolves interdict a smuggler, a marijuana smuggler, coming through with a false bed on in the box of a pickup truck that was extended downward about 7 to 9 inches, and underneath that were the bales of marijuana. I unloaded them myself and took them up to the scales where they were weighed, and they weighed approximately 240 pounds. The reason for that, Mr. Speaker, 240 pounds, is because in some sectors of the border, they don't have the ability to prosecute drug smugglers, and so they set a limit. The prosecutors will set a limit. Sometimes you have to have more than 500 pounds of marijuana to be prosecuted. Sometimes you have to have more than 250 pounds of marijuana to be prosecuted. The smugglers know that. I'm going to guess that the sector that I was in that day, the limit was, at least anticipated by the smugglers, to be 250 pounds. So they dialed it under 250 to about 240 pounds and sent their guy through. And he was caught, And what we don't know is, was that a decoy so that when all converged on that smuggler, that there wasn't a straight truck through with a couple of tons of marijuana in it? I don't know that. Those are tactics that we see. And that's tactics of using sometimes illegal crossings, sometimes going through the legal crossings that we have. A lot of the border isn't marked. Across New Mexico, there's a concrete pylon from horizon to the next horizon that's just set there, and you'd have to know what you were looking for to know where the border is. It's just open desert. And I've flown most of that, a lot of that at night. And I've also traveled, I'll say that I've traveled probably every mile of our southern border, with the exception of some of the miles along the Texas border, which zigzags quite a lot, and I haven't covered all of that. But, Mr. Speaker, we can build a fence, a wall, and a fence, and we can do it with less money than we're spending today on the southern border. Over $6 million a mile on the southern border. And to put this in perspective, to build an interstate across Iowa cornfield, expensive now, today expensive Iowa cornfield, we can buy the right-of-way, we can pay for the engineering, we can do the grading and the drainage work and the paving and the shouldering and the painting and the signage and the seating and the fencing, all of that, and open up a 4-lane interstate highway for about $4 million a mile. And we're spending $6 million on every single mile of our southern border, and we're getting something like 25% or less efficiency with what we have there. And part of it is because the President has declared by executive edict amnesty. And even though I think the Border Patrol is doing their job as well as they can within those limits, it's clear that ICE has been handcuffed. We have had the President of the ICE Union, Chris Crane, testify before this Congress. I think he's been 9 times into this city within the last year and a half or so, doing a stellar job of pointing out that the law requires the federal immigration officers to place into removal proceedings those people that they encounter that are unlawfully present in the United States. And it's their judgment on that that dictates. Well, the President's prohibited them from doing so through the Morton memos. The Morton memos that have been rejected by this Congress in 2 ways within the last 3 weeks or so. One is a full vote of the House on the King Amendment, and the other one is a vote of the Judiciary Committee on the King Amendment. And so we have, every way that we've had the opportunity, rejected the idea that the President can simply make up immigration law out of thin air, decide that he can issue work permits, that he can legalize people that are here illegally, that he can, by executive edict, destroy the rule of law. Destroy the rule of law. I often talk about the pillars of American exceptionalism. We are a great country, Mr. Speaker, and this great country that we are relies upon this America that Ronald Reagan described as the shining city on the hill. This city is built on the beautiful marble pillars of American exceptionalism. They are, many of them within the Bill of Rights. Freedom of speech, religion, the press, and assembly, all wrapped up in the First Amendment to our Constitution. There are property rights in the Fifth Amendment. There's a prohibition on double jeopardy. You get to be faced by your accuser and a jury of your peers. The states and personal rights that are reserved in the 9th and 10th Amendment, all of those are pillars of American exceptionalism. So is free enterprise capitalism. If we had none of that, we wouldn't have the nation we are. If you build, and I want to add to that, the core of our culture is Judeo-Christianity. We welcome people of all religions. The foundation of the American civilization is Judeo-Christianity, and without it, we can't be the America we are either. So think of this beautiful shining city on the hill that Reagan so eloquently described for us, sitting on the beautiful marble pillars of American exceptionalism. But I can't think of that city sitting there without also thinking of an essential pillar of exceptionalism called the rule of law. Now, if you would take a jackhammer and chisel away that marble pillar of American exceptionalism, which is freedom of speech, and destroy freedom of speech, the beautiful edifice of our shining city on the hill would crumble and fall. If you did the same thing to freedom of the press, our shining city on the hill would crumble and fall. If you took away our Second Amendment rights, which I didn't mention, but are a pillar of American exceptionalism, eventually our other freedoms would crumble and fall, and tyrants would take over. If you put people subject to double jeopardy, we wouldn't be the civilization we are, and the rule of law wouldn't mean what it does. It would crumble and fall. If you destroy the rule of law, if you have contempt for the rule of law, if the Supreme Court disregarded the rule of law, and if they ruled on interpreting their law to be their whim, their wish, not the very definition of the supreme law of the land being our Constitution. And as the President so well described, March 28, 2011, before a high school here in Washington, D.C., when he was asked, why don't you just implement the DREAM Act by executive order? His answer was, to the students who were listening, I don't have the constitutional authority to do that. You've been studying the Constitution. You as students know that it's the job of the legislature to pass the laws, the job of the executive branch to enforce the laws, and the job of the judicial branch to interpret the laws. Now that's an accurate description, as should aptly come from a former adjunct professor of constitutional law at the University of Chicago. That is our President. He knew what he was talking about, and that description was consistent with his oath of office, Mr. Speaker. The oath of office is defined within our Constitution. It's specific. It has been concluded with, so help me God, for a long time. But within that oath is also the oath to preserve and protect and defend the Constitution of the United States. And in the Constitution, it requires the President of the United States, our Chief Executive Law Enforcement Officer and Commander-in-Chief, to, quote, take care that the laws be faithfully executed, close quote. That doesn't mean, Mr. Speaker, execute the law. It doesn't mean execute the rule of law. It doesn't mean execute the Constitution itself. It means you take an oath and your job is to uphold the law, to take care that the laws be faithfully executed. Well, the President has defied his own oath of office. He's defied the rule of law. He's defied the Constitution, and he said, I'm not going to enforce the law. I'm not going to enforce the laws that I don't like. I disagree with some of the immigration policy that's been passed by Congress and signed by one of his predecessors, in fact, signed by Bill Clinton. He's refusing to enforce those kind of laws. That does great damage to the Constitution, and it throws the balance of the three branches of government out of whack. And our founding fathers imagined that there would be competition for power and influence between the three branches of government. They envisioned it always with three branches of government, the legislative branch, the executive branch, and the judicial branch of government. This Congress is in Article 1. That means we are more the voice of the people than any other branch of government. That was the first and most important branch. But they also knew that they had to have a strong chief executive, a strong president, a strong commander-in-chief. The experiences they went through in fighting a revolutionary war with the Continental Congress told them you can't have a strong national defense without a strong commander-in-chief. So they established that. And they established the balance between the legislative branch in Article 1 and the executive branch in Article 2, and also the balance, and I think to a slightly lesser degree, between the judicial branch. But think of it as a triangle. And they envisioned that each branch of government would seek to expand its power. That's human nature. You always want more power than you actually have. Whether you take this thing from the Pope to the President, right on down the line to senators, which have 1/100th of the power of the Senate chamber, House members that have 1/435th of the House chambers. We always want to have a little more leverage, a little more influence. Get your hands on a gavel, or maybe become the majority leader, the minority leader, the Speaker of the House. And actually the former Speaker of the House, Speaker Pelosi, just walked across this floor, Mr. Speaker, and she would understand that, as we all do. In a family, you always want to have more influence. If the patriarch of the family is the one that writes the rules, you always think, I don't really, you always grate a little bit underneath that. Well, that's a natural thing, to always try to grab a little bit more power. They knew it was human nature. And so they set up this balance between the three branches of government. But they envisioned that each branch of government would jealously protect its constitutional authority and not concede it to the usurpation of some other branch of government. They envisioned that Congress would try to grow in its influence and authority, and they gave the President veto power so that he could veto the overreach, potentially, of the House and the Senate together. They balanced the House and the Senate so that this hot cup of coffee of, well, a hot cup of tea, they were thinking, here in the House of Representatives, which can be a quick reaction force when things go wrong in America. A new crop of House members come in with the freshest of vigor that comes from the American people, and they set about changing things. That's a two-year election cycle. We saw that in 2010 when 87 new freshman Republicans came into the House of Representatives, every single one of them having run for office on the promise to repeal Obamacare, every single one. Meanwhile, while the House was being heated up, the Senate itself, which if all senators, rather than roughly a third of them, were up for election each cycle, I think we would have seen the majority turn over in the United States Senate, but it didn't quite do that. So the Senate has been the cooling saucer to the hot cup of tea or coffee that is the House. Our founding fathers saw that, and they wanted to balance that. They wanted to have the longer view in the Senate. They wanted the quick reaction forces in the House. They wanted to blend them together, and they did. I think they did a very good job of that. But they also wanted to then check an overreach of Article I, the legislative branch of the Congress, by giving the President of the United States veto power. And at the same time, they put constraints on the President because we can control the activities of the executive branch through the appropriations, if we can actually control the appropriations here in the House of Representatives. So they granted that authority. But they expected that there would be like a tug of war for that power. They did not think that the President of the United States would take an oath of office to preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution of the United States and be required to take care that the laws be faithfully executed, and then go out and execute the law rather than enforce the law. But that's what's happened. The President has, with impunity, defied the rule of law and simply canceled immigration law that exists on the books that requires ICE and federal immigration law enforcement officers to place those individuals unlawfully here in removal proceedings. That's the law. The President suspended it, and what has happened here in Congress? Well, there was an election after he did that. March 28, 2011, he said, I don't have the power to, by executive order, implement the DREAM Act. March 28, 2011. June 15, 2012, he assumed that authority. And he simply suspended the rule of law and imposed his will, his wish, on America. And what happened? The people that took an oath to uphold the Constitution and the rule of law decided that they were going to honor the lawlessness. And they decided that they were going to comply with the President's order because, well, their jobs were on the line for one thing, but I say also they have an oath of office for another. And when that happened, when there's a dispute between the legislative branch and the executive branch of government, the judicial branch needs to step in to sort out that dispute. I know they don't like to do that, Mr. Speaker. And so, in any case, I asked for a meeting and invited people to come to the table, which they did, and we discussed how we move forward to put a block on the President's unconstitutional assumption of legislative authority, the violation of the separation of powers. I had been through that litigation in the past in an issue I'll not take up here, but it had to do with the state issue and the state chief executive officer. I knew the arguments. Out of that meeting came the lawsuit of Crane versus Napolitano. That's Chris Crane, the president of the ICE union, as the lead plaintiff, and of course Napolitano is the Secretary of the Department of Homeland Security, Janet Napolitano. That case went before the Northern District of Texas, the federal court, where Judge Reed O'Connor ruled in favor of the plaintiffs, that's the ICE union and the list of plaintiffs that are there, ruled in favor of it in 9 of 10 arguments and sent the other argument back to the executive branch to reword it in such a way that, well, I'll just use my terms, Mr. Speaker, it's more intelligible so he could answer and respond on that particular point. Generally, the decision was this. Judge Rita O'Connor essentially wrote, shall means shall, not may. I mean, if it requires that the agents put people that are unlawfully present in the United States in removal proceedings, that if it says they shall do so, then they shall do so. Shall means shall, it doesn't mean may, and there's no word in our language that's more definitive that can replace the word shall, and at least as far as legal parlance is concerned. That's essentially the decision. So it seems to be, and I'm optimistic that it's moving in the direction that we will get a final decision in a federal court, and perhaps the administration will appeal this on all the way up the line to the Supreme Court. But in the end, I can't imagine how a judicial branch of government, how a Supreme Court could come down on the side of the President and decide that the President of the United States has the authority to make up laws as he goes along or disregard laws as he goes along. The President has argued that, well, at least the President and his spokesmen and women have argued that they have prosecutorial discretion. Prosecutorial discretion means that they can't enforce the law against every person who might violate the law because they don't have the resources, so the resources need to be targeted where they do the most good. That's prosecutorial discretion. I agree that that exists and that it's necessary that the discretion of prosecution exists. But I don't agree that the President can define broad classes of people that include hundreds of thousands in a single class and then decide that he's not going to enforce the law against any of them. That is what he has done. He's manufactured 4 classes of people and decided he's going to waive the law and all of these classes of people, suspend its enforcement. That turns out to be an invitation to more and more people to violate the law, even to the extent of we have had illegal aliens in the halls of the congressional offices that have lobbied members of Congress with impunity. And they will come in boldly and say, I'm exempted from the law by the President of the United States, so I can be here, and I demand that you agree with me and get me my college education. They have been inside the Judiciary Committee room. They have been introduced by the ranking member of the Judiciary Committee. That's how far this has gotten, Mr. Speaker. The contempt for the law, the contempt for the rule of law, and the sense of entitlement have gone beyond the pale. And so this rule of law, which must be reconstructed now, because the verbal and keyboard jackhammers of the left have chiseled away at that beautiful marble pillar of American exceptionalism called the rule of law. And because they have done that, we must reconstruct it. And if we can't hold the rule of law together, if we can't restore it, if we can't reconstruct it, then it crumbles. If the rule of law, according to the bill, the Gang of Eights bill in the Senate, according to some of what seems to be moving here in the House, destroys the rule of law, at least with regard to immigration. It destroys it. There would be no enforcement of the rule of law with regard to immigration unless you committed a felony, you're here unlawfully, you commit a felony, or you commit a combination of 3 mysterious misdemeanors that happens to qualify you for removal proceedings. Those are exemptions that are part of it. They claim that they will enforce the law on that. A balance of it, if you cross the border illegally and come into the United States, that is a crime, Mr. Speaker. If you overstay your visa, which is about, let's say a number that approaches 40% of those who are unlawfully present in the United States, that's a civil misdemeanor, not a crime, at least today. If you do either one of those things only, they're not going to put you in removal proceedings. And if you come across into the United States and you defraud your employer and you come up with fraudulent documents and you use that in order to get a job, this administration isn't going to enforce document fraud, which is a felony against you. Essentially, they've said, if you can get into the United States legally or illegally, if you can stay in the United States, you can cheat to get a job. You can lie to your employer, you can use document fraud, and there won't be a penalty to any of these things. Essentially, nonviolent, peaceful crimes are not going to be a problem. But if you get engaged in some of the serious things like maybe drug smuggling or the crimes of violence that we all know about, then, or the threat of violence even, then it makes the administration uncomfortable and they might decide to send you back and put you in the condition that you were in before you broke the law. But peaceful people have been granted amnesty by the President of the United States. And this Congress has sat here almost placidly and accepted it as if he has that constitutional authority, and he does not. That's why the lawsuit of Crane versus Napolitano was filed, and it's a clear understanding from my standpoint. But the confusion seems to be that too many members that take an oath of office to preserve, protect, and defend this Constitution as well don't have a clear enough understanding of the brighter line between Article 1 and Article 2. Our job is to legislate, write the laws. The President's job is to enforce them. It's that simple. And yet, there was an interpretation that came out to us on the morning of November 7th. Wednesday morning, November 7th, Mr. Speaker, and a lot of people will understand and remember what that date was. That was the day after the election. Now, I was engaged in this election as much as I've been engaged in any election. And as a member of Congress from Iowa, I was also engaged in the presidential nomination and election process. Was engaged in the debate. And I've done events that have to do with presidential candidates on a relatively regular basis. I think I understood what the debate was about for the election for President of the United States. And as I listened to that, it was about jobs in the economy. Jobs in the economy. If you would put jobs in the economy in quotes and attach it to, and then put Barack Obama's name in the search engine of Google, or if you would put jobs in the economy in quotes and then put Romney or Mitt there and in the search engine of Google and send that off, you're going to get hundreds of thousands of hits altogether. Because that was the topic of the election last November 6th. Jobs in the economy, jobs in the economy. And I told the Romney people, I've heard jobs in the economy so many times it puts me to sleep. Don't you think you're putting the American people to sleep by beating the same drum over and over again? But remembering the mantra, jobs in the economy, until we were just drubbed into numbness with it, also reminds us that the election was not, Mr. Speaker, about the immigration issue. I don't remember a debate between Barack Obama and Mitt Romney that went into any in-depth or substance on the immigration issue. And yet, before the sun came up on November 7th, some of the leading pundits and experts concluded that Mitt Romney would be president-elect by now before the sun came up on November 7th if he just hadn't said the two words self-deport, or if he had not been such a defender of the rule of law on immigration. Well, that was a surprise to me. I wish he'd have talked about it more. Well, he didn't. The election wasn't about immigration, but talking heads and, let me say, erroneously pragmatic individuals in my party decided that they would contribute to this argument that came from both parties. And they drove the argument to the point where some people were convinced the election really was about immigration when it was not. And they argued that Mitt Romney would be president-elect if he had just gotten a larger percentage of the Hispanic vote. He would not, Mr. Speaker. If he had won the majority of the Hispanic vote in the swing states, he still would not have won the presidency. If he'd won 70%, he might have. But that didn't happen. And no one really thinks that's going to happen in the near future. So they came to a conclusion, thought they could support it with facts. They've learned now that they can't support their conclusion with facts, but they're determined to go forward with granting amnesty to, initially, they think 11 million people that are here in this country unlawfully, while providing the emptiest and most vacuous of promises that one day they're going to get around to putting a plan together. And if the plan happens to be implemented, they might secure the border. That's what's going on. And I don't know how in the world they can say this to the American people with a straight face and believe that there's going to be border security in exchange for law enforcement. It's not going to happen, Mr. Speaker. It didn't happen in 1986 one of only 2 times that Ronald Reagan let me down. But in 1986, the promise was this. We had about 1 million people in the country illegally. Actually, it started at 700,000 to 800,000. That sounds like a minuscule number today. That roughly 1 million people, and the debate raged in the House and the Senate. And I believed all along that good sense would prevail. I believe that the people who gave their oath to uphold the Constitution in the House and in the Senate would understand that they were undermining the rule of law if they granted amnesty to people that came into America illegally. I believed all along that they would understand that if they grant amnesty, they're going to get more lawbreakers, more illegal border crossers, a less manageable situation than the one they had in 1986. But the argument for clemency, for amnesty, prevailed in the House and the Senate. But I believe that Ronald Reagan would understand the principle of the rule of law clearly enough and the long-term implications of such an act of amnesty in 1986 clearly enough that he would take the authority that's vested in him, was vested in him in the United States Congress, to veto that legislation and require the Congress to pass amnesty by a 2/3 majority in the House and the Senate and overturn his veto. I do not believe they could have done that in 1986. I believed Ronald Reagan would veto the Amnesty Act in 1986, and instead, to my great disappointment, he signed it. The calculation at the time was, if we just grant amnesty to these 1 million people, we're going to get full cooperation to enforce the border, and never again will there be another Amnesty Act. Never again. This was the Amnesty Act to end all amnesty acts. It was going to be law enforcement from that point forward. The border was going to be secured. There was going to be a clear prohibition on hiring illegal employees. They were going to shut off the jobs magnet. And they created the I-9 form. The I-9 form, which requires an employer to fill out the form, make sure you've got the documentation, the identification, make sure you have all of the I's dotted and the T's crossed on the I-9 form, because a federal agent's going to come inspect your paperwork. An INS agent would come and inspect your paperwork. I did all of those things as carefully as I could. I had a fear that I would slip up and not meet the standard, Mr. Speaker. And so we very carefully documented our job applicants in my construction company to make sure that we were in compliance with the law, all the while expecting that that INS agent was just around the corner taking a look at the paperwork of our competition or our neighboring business. Of course they never showed up to check my paperwork. I'm not disappointed by that. I'm disappointed they didn't show up to check the paperwork of thousands of employers with millions of employees. The enforcement didn't really happen. It didn't happen in shutting off the jobs magnet. The litigation began. The ACLU began litigating, and other organizations did, and they began to argue, you're requiring an employer to make a judgment call when he looks at the documents and the picture and the face of the person that's applying, and if you cannot require an employer to make a judgment call because it makes them liable for the lawsuit we're going to sue them with. And so the litigation of immigration turned it into a mess, intentionally, I believe, so that they could provide for open borders, which was the intention of the Teddy Kennedys and others at the time. And they undermined the enforcement effort politically, and they undermined it in the courts, and they undermined it culturally, and they began to convert the people who came here illegally into a victims group. And if you understand the politics of victimology, you understand that there's a certain amount of sainthood that gets attached to these victims and for people that are in victims groups. That conversion has been taking place since probably before 1986, but I remember it from that point forward. What Ronald Reagan learned, and what today his Attorney General at the time, Attorney General Ed Meese, knows and has 3 times written about, and what another member of the Reagan administration, Gary Bauer, knows and has spoken openly of, is that if you grant amnesty, if you suspend the rule of law, and you tell people, we're not going to enforce the law against you, continue to break it, you get more lawbreakers. More lawbreakers means more lawlessness. And more lawlessness erodes the rule of law. And when they bring a bill to the Senate that legalizes, aside from the felons, the 3 mysterious misdemeanor committers, aside from that, it legalizes everybody in the United States that's here illegally. Not only that, they send an invitation by the bill out to anybody that has been deported in the past and says, reapply, come back into the United States. We really didn't mean it. And they say, well, if you came here after December 31st, 2011, well, you're not going to be exempted by this Amnesty Act that is coming through the Senate. So presumably they're going to enforce the law against those who came here after December 31st, 2011. But, Mr. Speaker, they're not going to do that. If they were going to do that, you would see a news story about somebody who was put back in the condition they were in before they broke the law that came here after December 31st, 2011. No, ICE is prohibited from enforcing the law against people that fit these definitions. And I asked that specific question of the president of the ICE union before the Judiciary Committee under oath, and he said, if they're in jail, I can't put them in removal proceedings. Even if they're in jail, he can't go into jail and say, listen, I'm required to put you in removal proceedings, I'm going to take you back to the port of entry. He can't do that. Who's in handcuffs now? ICE, the Border Patrol, in handcuffs today. They can't enforce the law the way it's written in the 86, even the 86 Amnesty Act, let alone the 1996 Immigration Reform Act, of which Lamar Smith of Texas had such a huge role in. Good legislation, glad they did it. 86 was flawed, should have never been passed. But if ICE can't enforce the law today, even if someone is in jail and they are essentially handcuffed from doing their job, and there's a legalization of the people that came into the United States before December 31st, 2011, and an invitation of those who have since been removed to come back again, and no prospect they're going to enforce the law against those who come in after December 31st of 2011, that makes it, Mr. Speaker, the always is, always was, and always will be Amnesty Act. And I use a little bit of, let me say, license here to speak of it this way. Always is, always was, and always will be. If you is in America, you gets to stay. If you was in America, you gets to come back. And if you will be in America, you also get to stay. This is the perpetual and retroactive Amnesty Act. The perpetual, it goes on forever. You could never enforce immigration law again. You could never say to people, well, you came here after our deadline, now we're going to enforce the law. Not after you flow 11 or 22 million or 33 million people into this country, or a number that results from this that may perhaps be over 50 million people over time. Numbers USA's number is 33 million people that get legalized as the effect of the legislation in the Senate. Robert Rector's study at the Heritage Foundation, and both of them, by the way, did stellar work yesterday. His study only contemplates 11.5 million people, which is the lowest number, the reduced number, the boiled down number of those we know are here that essentially reflects off the United States Census. That's the people that admit they're here when you ask them, are you here illegally? A number approaching 11 million said, yes, I am. I confess. We know that in the 86 Amnesty Act that was roughly 1 million people anticipated, it became over 3 million people. So use the 3-to-1 multiplier. That does reflect pretty close. And it's not the formula used by Numbers USA. That formula is a careful formula that calculates family unification and the record we have of human activity on how they react to the legislative changes that take place. But if the formula was 1 million in 86, it became 3 million because of document fraud and other reasons. Those who gamed the system, those who came in before the Amnesty Act was signed or even after the Amnesty Act was signed to take part in that and lied about when they came here, the 1 million became 3 million. It doesn't stretch my imagination to see that the 11 million become 33 million. That seems to me to match up in two different types of formulas. So do we really want to legalize 33 million people or even 11 million people? Do we want to give them access to all of the government benefits that we have? Do we want to let them have access immediately to, let's say, at least to and their children to the systems that we have, the healthcare system, the education system we have, the public security systems we have? Do we want to put them in a place where their tax return makes them eligible for the earned income tax credit so that all of their children that may not live in the United States even at the time, they get a check from the federal treasury for that? Do we want to see this pour out to where the number that came from Robert Rector's study is that on average the people that would be included in this Amnesty Act in the Senate, over the course of the time they would live in the United States, the average comes in at 34 years old, and a 34-year-old, by the time they reach that age, will live to the age of about 84. That's 50 years in the United States. That's a net cost to the taxpayer of $580,000 per person. Do we want to really write a check or borrow the money from the Chinese to fund that? Do we need that many more people in the United States doing the work they say Americans won't do for a price of $580,000 per person? Do we want to rent cheap labor for the price of $12,000 a year? That's what the math works out to. I think it's $11,600 a year. Do we really want to do the taxpayers care that much about having somebody to cut the grass and somebody to weed the garden and somebody to do all of this work that they claim Americans won't do? By the way, I don't think anybody in this Congress can find work that I haven't been willing to do. And I think my sons had certainly reinforced that statement. They remind me that they've been out in 126-degree heat index and poured concrete on those days. And they've been driving sheet piling across the swamp at 60 below wind chill. They tell me that's 186 degrees temperature change, and no species on the planet could survive what they went through growing up in our family. And I say, well, no species other than my sons, and I remind them that, and me too, guys. We did work like that in the heat and the cold, in the rain and the snow. We did work underground. We do sanitary sewer work. We do earth work. We do all kinds of things. We do demolition. All the work that they say that Americans won't do, we've done a whole lot of that, and we'll do more. No one's too proud to do work in this country. We're just sometimes not willing to do work for the price that's offered. And we know that free enterprise capitalism takes us to this. The value of anything, including labor, is determined by the supply and demand in the marketplace. Corn prices go up and down depending on how much there is. How much corn there is, the supply, and how many customers there are to buy it, the demand. That's true for gold and oil and platinum and soybeans and labor. And because we have an oversupply of unskilled labor and underskilled labor is why we have such low wages and benefits at low and unskilled labor. The highest unemployment's in the lowest of skills. And yet people in this Congress think you have to expand the low-skilled labor numbers, bring people in, low and unskilled. The Senate version of the bill, 7 unskilled people and undereducated people for every one that's going to be able to pay their going rate on what it costs to sustain them in society. For every person that would come in under the Senate bill that would pay as much or more in taxes as they draw down in government benefits, there are 7 who will not be able to do that. The universe of those in the 11 million people cannot sustain themselves in this society that we have, not in a single year of their projected existence in this culture, in this society, in this economy. So why would we do that? Why, if we need more people to pull on the oars, would we allow 100 million Americans that are of working age and simply not in the workforce to sit up there in steerage while we bring people on board to pull the oars and wait on the people sitting in steerage? That defies any kind of rational logic, Mr. Speaker. So to destroy the rule of law, to, I'll say, subsidize a non-work ethic, and now it turns into 3 generations of Americans that are drawing down some of the 80 different means-tested welfare programs, it is foolish for us to consider such a proposal, and I'm hopeful that the good sense of the American people can do something about the spell that has been cast over too many Republicans in the House and the Senate. And so, Mr. Speaker, I urge the American people to save this Congress from themselves and restore the rule of law, and I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields back.